Let's finish up the traditional logics and sort of principles of Feng Shui. There's two basic schools, and you can confuse this even more. There's two basic, schools. There's two basic intellectual forms of Feng Shui. The traditional one is called the imperial one usually. That's the EuroAmerican one, actually, if you go back and look at that. So this would be the one that's similar to the Hawaiian. Very landform shapes, cardinal flow, all this type of thing in terms of, I should say, sorry, flow of hydraulics. This is the traditional form. This is the one that's very closely tied to Ming Shui. The second form, which started up about 400 or 500 years ago, is tied to Tibetan beliefs. Tibetan Buddhism and Taoism is very different than its Chinese counterpart. It's very much more what you might call mystical, for lack of a better term. And so I think when the Tibetan forms of Buddhism and Taoism became really popular in the Qing dynasty in China, is what you ended up with a new form of Feng Shui that came out of this. This is entirely driven by Ming Shui. One aspect of this is you start to find much more predictability. This is much more closely tied to what Westerners would consider astrology. Excuse me. And so what happens is, it's going to change daily. You can hire specialists that basically predict your future. It's much more fixed. There's less potential. It's more this will happen instead of this might happen, or this is more probable. They're going to say does. There's a real fascination with a Luopan, which is a compass. I have one around here somewhere. I can't find it. But basically, it's very mystical. And one interesting aspects of this is traditional Feng Shui is something you learn. You can get certified by the EuroAmerican Mastery Academy or whatever it may be. My Shifu was certified in Hong Kong. So, you actually go through training, just like you guys get degrees. And it's very much that intellectual system. In the second form, the compass form, the Bagua form, what you find is much more of it's based on your internal intuition. So if someone has particular mystical abilities, they are specialists in this. And in part, if you didn't have that mystical abilities, it wouldn't matter how much training you had, you still couldn't do it. So when you look at that Feng Shui show, the one that's looking at sort of EuroAmerican Feng Shui, the guy that they've got who's the, sort of the Shifu, that he's an example of the very mystical second, the compass cardinal version. These folks will say that it works all the time. So when you're looking at EuroAmerican Feng Shui, the idea that you can put a flute somewhere or a fountain somewhere and it will work for everyone, that's actually out of the second form of Feng Shui. And if you go to China, if you go to, for example, the Forbidden City or the Purple City in Beijing, much of that was actually laid out with the second form. And so you'll find all sorts of stuff around that's actually part of this, it applies to everyone type of thing, which is sort of interesting because if you go to the older capitals like in Chang'an, which is now called Xi'an, you'll find that there, and for example, also Kyoto, that's actually based on the older, the traditional landform version of Feng Shui. So the compass cardinal version basically says you can put something anywhere. You just have to put various things around it to protect it and make it work right. The traditional form would say putting something here is a bad idea, putting something there is a good idea. And there's nothing you can do about things that's going to change that. So they're very, very different in terms of how they function, how they operate, just every aspect of them. I've never really spent a lot of time with the second version. I find it, not compelling, I guess, for lack of a better term. Where they do have in common is you're trying to get harmony. All the forms of Feng Shui, going back to what I mentioned last time, and I think I was talking a couple of times before, is they're all based on balance. You don't want to be too much of something. You don't want to be too hot. You don't want to be too cold. You don't want to be too male, too female. You always want to be in the center. And this is why you frequently, if you ever get involved in Asian meditation or Tai Chi or Qigong or anything like that, they'll frequently tell you how to center yourself. Even Chinese martial arts or Asian martial arts will say the same thing. If you're doing karate, your shifu will constantly lecture you have to be centered. And that doesn't mean physically centered. It means in every aspect of your existence, you have to be in the center. If you're off in one way or the other, you're out of balance. And For Asian martial arts, that's actually when you win. You get the person out of balance. If you're in balance, then you're going to win. So balance is absolutely key. You don't want to be the best at something. You don't want to be too much of something. You want to be the right amount of all the different potentials. And this makes it hugely different than the sort of Calvinist Western concept of you've got to constantly improve, make yourself better, and be the best that you can be type slogan, which is someone's, I can't remember whose that is. That would not make any sense in the Asian concept. And it's certainly not any part of Feng Shui. In a traditional Feng Shui system, you wouldn't want to make your home office as good as it could be so that you'll be the best business person you'll be. Because the attitude would be, well, that's gonna screw you up. That's going to be certain types of chi that are going to burn you out and make you sick more quickly. To a certain extent, when you get into the EuroAmerican form, based in part on this second logic, then people will frequently try to do that to make their office the best or to make their bedroom the best. And this is where it doesn't fit the traditional Feng Shui logic at all. There's the concept of balance gets tossed out. You want to maximize your whatever, and that's not the principle or logic of Feng Shui. The rest of it we've already gone over, so let's not worry about that. Now, if you look at Western Feng Shui, this is very much object-based. It's very much universal objects. The same thing works the same way. Having a fountain in an office where you hear bubbling water will have the same results no matter who you are. Those of you that have watched, if you haven't yet, then watch the Japanese garden video. One of the things that doesn't really come out that was part of those designs, especially the older gardens in places like Kyoto or Osaka for that matter, is that those gardens had different impacts on different people. And so different parts of the garden generate different types of chi. And so traditionally in Japan, as in the rest of Asia, different individuals would spend more time in one part of the garden than another part of the garden because they needed to recharge this part of their chi or maybe remove part of too much chi of some other form. And so when you go through these gardens, they're oftentimes seen as a continuum, but they're really not. They're a bunch of very almost discrete, like charging or discharging stations. And if you knew what you were doing, you knew exactly where to go because that's how that was supposed to work. And you knew how to use that to your advantage. So again, a whole level of sort of like intellectual relationship with the landscape that's almost entirely absent, in people's general perception. Even today, many Asians don't understand how gardens work in Asia. So this new version that comes out, hugely popularized by the 1960s, 1970s, became an enormous thing of sort of new age religions in the West, especially in the United States, but also in a lot of Western Europe, especially Germany for some reason, was this idea of sort of reinterpretations of Asian logic, or if you would, reinterpretations of aspects of Feng Shui. They almost always dropped almost everything to do with Ming Shui, because Ming Shui by its logic is always unique to an individual. And so what you got here was the idea of universality, that basically an object would have the same impact regardless of who it was. So let's go and first I'll give you an image of traditional Feng Shui, and then we'll see an example of the new Feng Shui, you might say. Okay, here you see the humble administrator's garden again. We saw this before. This is a really fascinating example of Asian sort of architecture, garden design, and it's probably its premier. Because, again, this guy was so powerful. But what you're really looking at here, okay, sorry. What you're seeing here is actually a very conscious attempt to manipulate different types of chi. The wall is blank that I'm standing behind here, and all of a sudden you've got this doorway cutout that's unique. So there's nothing to see when you walk up here. This isn't a visually available area. It's intentionally hidden from view till you come through here. Again, you have to remember with both Feng Shui, but also with just the idea of texture, that there's no separation given between visual and texture and audio and etc. So as the wind blows, you're going to hear it rustling through here. You've got these hard but rounded edges here, which have one texture. You've got the very complex tiled floor here, which is again very sharp intentionally with the chevrons texture. You've got the hard rocks here. You've got the tree, which is both soft in the sense that the shape is very curvy, but it's also hard in the sense that it's a solid tree. You've got the water, which is soft. You've got the air, which of course you have to remember emptiness is part of this. So the emptiness is part of this. This whole location was designed specifically for the generation and consumption of qi. Now, by virtue of how you used it, you also could manipulate the types of qi. So, for example, this building here is where the humble administrator, the prime minister, would basically write his memos, read stuff. If they had it at the time, would he used emails. So this is where he did his work. And so to get there, you go this way. And in going through this way, you go through an area, if you notice, it's quite stark because it's going to generate the type of creative chi that he would need by virtue of his birth date and everything else to do his best work or have the potential to do his best work at this location. Where he would sleep would be somewhere different because you wouldn't want that same type of energy or the same energy inflow. If things are going poorly, then you turn right here and you go this way and you go up on a windy path that goes up a little artificial hill through all sorts of trees, brush, and stuff like that, all very soft greens, some bamboo. So almost like the exact opposite of this, and that generates other types of chi. So depending on what day you're having, you would go this way to basically manipulate the chi to achieve this result, or go this way to manipulate chi to get that result. And that's the function of this garden. This whole garden is a series of almost like, generators for cars at a parking lot. But in this case, different types of generators. Or for example, if you've got too much anxious energy, you need to calm down, then you go this way and it'll remove some of the chi that you don't want. So nothing about this is aesthetic in a Western sense. It's very pretty, but to the people that actually built it and used it, the aesthetic component was actually really minor. The fact that it was aesthetic just showed how good the landscape architect was, and then he could do this and make it pretty, which of course is also part of Qi. But the main function of this is a very, very complicated set of logics, which both of course, the architect that built this and the administrator that paid for it understood. You could do a whole dissertation probably on this one sort of image here in terms of what you actually see here and its actual functions that everyone who was a part of it understood. So when you're looking at traditional feng shui, you have to remember it's within this context of a very, very complex, very sophisticated system. Now, the vast majority of Chinese, even back when this was being built, didn't understand maybe 95% of it. But there were parts of it that everyone understood, and there's parts of it that still everyone understands. And that makes it in some ways rather different in that, again, as I mentioned before, education, intellectual achievement is an enormous status prestige thing. In fact, it's the top of the feeding chain logic that you see in Asian systems. And this garden is a perfect example of that. Those people that are well educated will understand what the garden's saying and what the garden's functions are. Those that are less well educated won't understand as much of it. Those that are clueless, well, that's just tough on them. So this garden's fascinating in many, many, many ways. In its own way, it's the equivalent of a large mansion or something like that in the Western sense, because it is making a lot of statements about power and prestige. But power and prestige in ancient societies is based on intellectual achievement and education, not on your wealth or power. That will result from education, but it doesn't. They're not synonymous. Okay, now the second time, or what I'd call the Euro-American form of feng shui. This is most famously, again, the huge sort of entrepreneur that really has popularized this in the last 15, 20 years is Lillian Tu. She actually has a shop. I'm not sure if it's still her shop. It used to be. It's the one in Kapahulu across from Panda Travel. It's World of Feng Shui. And one ways that you can tell if you're looking at traditional feng shui or what I'd call westernized feng shui is how they approach it. You can see it right here, the varieties of feng shui enhancers and cures. Traditional feng shui doesn't cure. Traditional feng shui changes your potential. So the humble administrator's garden, for example, there was nothing in that would cure you of something. You could go to different parts of the garden and it would enhance or take away the various types of qi, but it's not going to make you healthy if you're sick or something like that. If you can't sleep, it's not going to make you sleep better. It will give you a better chance of sleeping. But the Western style very much is into you will get this. In fact, let me go into this and we'll take a look at it after I've paused for a sec. Okay, so actually we're now in the store. And what's really key about this, and this is when you're in this second version, is that anyone could purchase this. I'm not sure what they're calling it, Pixie. Oh, PZA. Yeah, that's right. The dog lines. That gets you wealth. Anyone that purchases this will have good health. Anyone who purchases this mantra roll scroll hanging will have good health. If you have this, you will be protected from robbery. So the idea that you have an object and the object actually gives you X, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter when you're born, you will get that by virtue of that particular object. This is very much the second school, or very much the Western school of Feng Shui. And I think for Westerners, given the complexity and the density of knowledge that you have to do the traditional forms, it's not surprising in the Western context. This is the most popular. You don't find this being very popular in places like Singapore, but you see it to a certain extent in China. And a lot of Chinese you will see have started to purchase this stuff in the last 100 years. But there's still a very clear attitude for most folks that are at least partially grounded in the traditional forms, that this is only going to have limited viability and it's going to be very individual dependent. So they still have this very strong attitude that your particular birth date and the potentials that are tied to that, what I suppose you'd call a sign, are probably more important than buying this particular metal version of a gourd. In the Western concept, it doesn't matter when you were born. If you buy this, you will get that. And so for $34, you can get a metal version of a gourd that will help promote good health, and it will do it for everyone in the house. And if you sell the house and you leave the gourd behind, the new folks that move in, it will do it for them too. This is very much this Western version, which is very much based on the idea that, again, of universality, that the symbols will work for everyone the same way. And if you think about it, we're not actually looking at the objects here, it's the symbolism of the objects. So there's still the symbolic component, but now you just made it where it's the same. So you don't have this idea of uniqueness. Now, of course, one of the other side effects is that means that if you're in the Euro-American or Western concept of Feng Shui, you can just go down, for example, into these guys' online store and you can buy this and you will get that. You don't have to hire a specialist. You don't need to have someone who knows what your birthday is. You don't need to know what the minute and hour was that you were born, which generally you don't have. I don't have it. Very rarely on a Western birth certificate where you say the minute and hour that you're born. Might have the hour, but almost never would have the minute. So, to a certain extent, this is an entirely different set of logics. It also isn't place-based. If you notice, this will give you good health no matter where you put it in the house and no matter where the house is. So it doesn't matter if the house is on the edge of Hawaii Lower Ridge or in the middle of a valley or whatever, it will work just as well. Whereas in the traditional form, the actual landforms are absolutely central and much more important than stuff. In fact, if you listen to the Joey Yap presentation, I think that's one of your videos, he sort of goes off on the whole idea that things will actually make things happen for folks. In the traditional form, it's just that it doesn't work that way. So very, very different concepts. Now they're both called Feng Shui, and that's probably hugely confusing to folks that aren't familiar with it because, well, it's called the same thing, so they must be the same. Well, they're really not. And I would argue that in large part, the 1960s, 70s embracing of all this sort of second form in the New Age religions is very much part of New Age religions in general, which were very much into borrowing symbols and objects from other religions and sort of reinterpreting them in a very 21st century, sort of blunt to say, sort of consumerism-based economy. You can, I would imagine if you go to Amazon or especially like Etsy, I bet you can find a ton of good luck objects or good health objects they don't care who you are. If you buy it, it'll work for you. That's just a very, very different view of the concepts of energy, landscape, place, and object. And the second form really doesn't involve landscapes at all. It's entirely sort of object based. The first one is basically almost entirely landscape based and has almost no interest in objects.